I'm going to speak today on American medicine. I want to take this in two parts, the earlier part and then of course the later part. I've had a rather long day, so I hope I can marshal my thoughts sufficiently well. Now, America gained independence from the United Kingdom, from Britain. On the 4th of July 1776, it became an independent nation. Then, of course, there followed the American Civil War between the North and the South, which the North fortunately won. But you know the legacy and the tribulations of that war are with us still. Now, American medicine by Americans started ever since, really, the country became independent. And most of these doctors in America were trained in Edinburgh, remarkably, many of them anyway. They were also influenced by schools, the medical schools in London, Paris, Vienna, and in Holland. What was the school in Holland? Leiden, that's right. The medical school Leiden in Holland. And during the course of time, over the next 300 years, you have, of course, excellent centers today in America, particularly New York, Boston, Philadelphia. But after the initial incursion, shall we say, of these doctors from these medical schools in Europe, advances in medicine in America came from within. They had to come from within. There were vast seas on either side of America. Information couldn't easily be obtained as to what was happening in Europe. So they had to start from where they were, within themselves. And considering the fact that it was a pioneering country with pioneering spirit, there was, therefore, fresh thoughts, bold actions, and also a decided spirit of scientific inquiry. I wish to tell you of a great man, internationally known, but not known to many of you. Many of you doctors and nurses, I doubt if you've heard his name. This man was named Dr. William Beaumont. He was an army officer, not particularly well trained or well taught or well practiced, but he was an army officer in a fort on the island McKinney. This was an island at the confluence of the River Huron and River Michigan. And on this island, traders used to come. And they used to exchange pelts. Pelts are skins of animals that have been killed. And there was a big hoo-ha always when this trading took place on the island. Now, one fine day, when this was happening, a shotgun accidentally blew off and accidentally hit a man called Alexis St Martin. It blew off half the side of his chest and half the side of his stomach, of his abdomen. They thought he was dead, but he was breathing, and they could feel his pulse, though they sent for Dr. William Beaumont from the fort on that particular island. The fort probably was an outstation fort for defense. So my friend William Bowen comes running to see this man, and he says he's almost dead. Nevertheless, he worked on him. He managed to stitch his chest up, but he found it impossible to stitch his abdomen up. His stomach had been laid completely bare. He bandaged him, went back and said within 2 hours he's going to die. He returns the next morning and finds that Alexis St Martin is alive. So he works on him feverishly, manages to salvage him, but he cannot close the wound in his stomach. It was so big a wound that one could look inside the stomach with one's eyes. And then, as time went on, and Alexis St Martin lived instead of dying, as sometimes happens, he started to make a study of the physiology of the stomach. Untrained, unskilled, no great doctor really, as you and I would really call it, but he decides to study the stomach because he could see the inside of it. He noted when the patient was given food, the food would largely trickle out of the wound in his stomach. So he had to put a spigot there to make sure it didn't come out. What did he see in his stomach? He saw the mucus lining. He saw that the stomach secreted substances, and he defined these substances. He was the first man to say that the stomach secreted hydrochloric acid, that the stomach secreted enzymes, and it was these enzymes which digested the food. And the purpose of the stomach, therefore, with the acid and with the enzymes, was first to digest the food and then to propel that food from the stomach into the small gut. He saw that with his own eyes. He also noted how the mucous membrane of the stomach could be affected by emotional changes. When Alexis St Martin was angry, the stomach would be bright red in color. When he was nice and cool, it would be pink, the usual color. At night, the color was different, the secretions were less. In the daytime, particularly after a meal, the secretions were a lot more. This went on, ladies and gentlemen, for more than 2.5 decades. And this was done free of charge. He looked after it, mind you. It was a symbiotic relationship between a doctor and a patient. And it is believed that there has never been such a relationship, internationally it is believed, of this kind between a doctor and a patient, lasting for this length of time. So, what happens? Bowman follows Alexis St Martin, who is well provided for otherwise also, all over Europe, literally tails him, makes his observations, writes these observations down, talks about them, writes them down and publishes them. And it goes on for 1.5 decades. Still, Alexis St Martin literally is absolutely fed up of Dr. Bowman. And I think the last time that this sort of study on his stomach was done was sometime around 1856 or so. What happens to Alexis St Martin? Remarkably, he lived till he was 80 years old, quite a ripe old age. And what happened when he died? When he died, his relatives were rather afraid of him. He was an unusual man. So what did they do? They let his body rot. And when it had sufficiently rotted, they dug a very, very deep grave and buried him. And then what else did they do? After they had buried him, they put huge stones over the grave. And why so? They felt they didn't want this man to have any further medical research done on him, and they also felt that he was rather a supernatural fellow, and they didn't want his spirit to trouble anyone in the world. Madness, I think, but this is how ultimately Alexis St Martin died, and this is the end of his story. As for William Bowman, he was the father of gastroenterology, particularly of gastric physiology. He made an elaborate study of the physiology of the stomach. And it is remarkable that a man barely educated in the medical sciences, with barely any medical practice at all, merely holding a post as a medical officer in a small little fort in the wilderness of North America, could have managed to start and make a dent in the physiology of the gastrointestinal tract. That is his story. I want to tell you another story also of a similar great individual. A similar great individual. His name was Ephraim McDowell. And he lived in a small little village, I think it was Danville in Kentucky. Small village, small practice. He receives a call from another village some 20 miles away or so, saying that there is a lady in labor. Her name, if I remember, was Jane Crawford. She was in labor, but they couldn't deliver the baby and she was in agonizing pain. Could Dr. Ephraim McDowell help, please? She was in agonizing pain. So Ephraim McDowell gets onto his horse. Just imagine 1856 or so, and imagine 200 years from then, difference in transport. He gets onto his horse, gallops away on those 20 miles and goes and sees that woman. He examines her carefully with his eyes, his ears and hands and says, oh God, this is no pregnancy. She's not pregnancy. She doesn't have a baby inside her tummy. She has a huge tumor inside her tummy. And the tumor arises from within the pelvis, he said. Therefore, in all probability, it arises from the ovary. It's a big ovarian tumor. I can't do anything about it. It has to be removed. But he told the lady, I could remove it, but you would probably die when I remove it. I have never removed it. And what is more, no one so far has ever removed an ovarian tumor from within the abdomen. The lady said, I would rather die now. I can't bear this pain. So please, 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 do what you can. So McDowell said, I can't do this here. If you want me to do something, you'll have to come to my place, please. That's a horse ride, almost 10-20 miles away. And then I'll see what is to be done. Lady, he returns back. The doctor returns back. The lady says, I have to go. And she rides a horse. And on the side saddle is this huge tumor hanging out of her tummy. She manages to go those 15-20 miles on horseback in a day's time and lands at McDowell's house. McDowell says, you better rest. You're absolutely exhausted. You will have to wait till you find yourself at least feeling better, till you can feed yourself. And this went on for some days, 10, 12 days. And McDowell decides to operate on the 25th of December, which is Christmas Day. The people in this little village got wind of this. And they said, how can the doctor ever do such a thing to a patient? He's planning to slit her abdomen open. So they all surrounded his house, you won't believe it. And they said, we will lynch you if this lady dies. We will lynch you if this lady dies. And lynching used to be not an uncommon practice in those days, except they usually lynched black people and not white people. But this is what the people in the village said. McDowell was surprised. And he said, what? He was a man of great courage. I said, lynch me if she dies. He replies to them, shuts the doors. And surgery starts. He lays her out on the kitchen table. Not on an operation table, on a clean wooden kitchen table. Tells the lady, can I give you a big swig of alcohol? He says, no, I want nothing. What will you do? How will you bear the pain? I should pray. So she starts singing hymns loudly with her eyes closed. After 5 minutes of this, McDowell incises the abdomen with a 9-inch scar, opens the abdomen, sees the tumor, pulls the tumor out of the abdomen, scoops out a whole lot of dirty gelatinous material which weighed 9 pounds. Further, mobilizes what is left, and ultimately removes the skin of the tumor, or the covering of the tumor, after having put a suture at the stalk. That covering also weighed another 9 kilos. So it was about 9 pounds. So it was about 18 pounds in weight. During that time, he managed to take the gut, put it on the kitchen table, and put moist, warm cloth in it. Remarkable. Because that is what all surgeons do when they open the abdomen. They don't put out the gut onto the table, but they put a warm, moist cloth onto the gut so that the gut's vitality is preserved. Intuitively, because the tumor must have been very large and the guts were spilling out, he put the guts onto the table, covered it with warm, moist cloth. Surgery done, he puts the gut back. He turns her over to the side so that all the water goes away and stitches her. The stitch, as I told you, the incision, as I told you, was 9 inches long. All through, Mrs. Crawford continues to shout hymns loudly and clearly and appeared as if there had been no pain whatsoever. The lady recovers, and you will ask me, how is it she had no pain? It's obvious to me. This was a form of self-hypnosis. She had managed to hypnotize herself. She managed to hypnotize herself by singing those things, singing those hymns. Her brain, her mind being focused on things outside this world. She recovers. She stays at his house for some time, and she rides back home nice and well. This was the first ever case where an abdomen had been opened and an ovarian tumor had been removed. I think this man was really a hero in medicine. A hero of a man, and also a hero in medicine. A man who was hardly trained, with very little practice. Mind you, earlier on he had been to Edinburgh, but he had never gained a degree, but he had some training in Edinburgh. A man who was able to breach the frontiers of science, the frontiers of medicine, for the first time. Of course, there was a lot of ridicule because they were envious. One of the American surgeons called him a ripper, an abdominal ripper, and so on and so forth. He kept quiet. He knew he could do it. He did this 13 times over. In other words, he removed 13 ovarian tumors, of which 6 or 7 lived, 5 died, and 1, the tumor couldn't be removed because of tight adhesions within the stomach, and the abdomen had to be closed. After that, he reported it. And following that, there was a plethora of cases of other surgeons venturing to remove ovarian tumors by opening the abdomen. You see, the abdomen is a Pandoras box. What is meant by a Pandoras box? There are so many organs within it. So when something goes wrong, it's extremely difficult to find out what's going wrong. And particularly to keep the Pandoras box closed for all time, you'll never know what happens. Sometimes, even with a closed box, you know what happens. But sometimes with a closed box, you cannot know what is happening. And that's the time when surgery becomes necessary. So here is a man who opens Pandora's box and tells the surgeons around that when you have a problem and you don't know what it is, it might be a good idea to open the box and see what's happening. I must tell you about one other at least American surgeon of that time. His name was James Syme. He was a gynecologist. He was one day called to see a slave girl who had difficult labor. And after a difficult forceps delivery, he noticed that the poor girl had developed a vesico-vaginal fistula. That means an opening or a communication between the bladder and the vagina. It was an extremely difficult thing to close. Even today, it requires very expert surgery. He failed in his attempts to do that when he met other patients, till ultimately discovered what is now called the speculum, which is a speculum with a handle which allows one to see the inside of the vagina, and once that is seen, they could visualize the vesicovaginal fistula and allow surgery to be confidently done. He was a great gynecologist, and even today his name is held with great reverence. Education in America was not really good as far as medicine was concerned. Would you believe it? They would give a degree within 1 month at that time. Sorry, in 1 year at that time. And you can imagine what sort of doctors those would be. But as time went on, things changed. And slowly education improved, particularly with great universities and great medical schools. Like, for example, the Hopkins School, John Hopkins, schools in Massachusetts, and schools in New York. I shall talk to you about some great doctors at that period of time. Thank you.